There are nights in Genoa City when danger does not announce itself with sirens or shattered glass. It moves quietly, with patience, with memory, with the cold confidence of someone who has already learned how to turn other people's lives into crime scenes. That is the kind of night now closing in around Nick. Somewhere in the shadows, Matt is no longer thinking like a desperate man trying to escape consequences. He is thinking like a hunter who has found the exact rhythm of his prey's movements and intends to use that rhythm against him. The room Nick believes is temporary, shelter is about to become the first stage of a carefully designed trap, and the most terrifying part is not the violence Matt may use to seize control. It is the intention behind it. Matt does not merely want to hurt Nick. He wants to corrupt the truth around him. He wants to build a reality so twisted, so airtight, that Nick and perhaps Adam will wake up inside it already condemned, with the evidence arranged around them like a verdict that has been waiting for them all along. For Nick, the danger begins long before he understands it. His recent path has already left him emotionally exposed, moving through unfamiliar territory with too many threats, circling from directions he cannot fully track. He has been fighting exhaustion, suspicion, and the growing sense that every step forward somehow pulls him deeper into somebody else's game. That tension has made him more alert, but not invincible. Men like Nick often mistake resilience for safety. They survive so many storms that they start believing instinct alone will keep them alive. Yet Matt understands something brutal about that kind of confidence. Even the sharpest man can be destroyed if he is exhausted enough, isolated enough, and emotionally overloaded enough to miss the one moment that matters. So Matt waits. He studies Nick's routines, calculates his timing, and then slips into Nick's room not as an intruder improvising in panic, but as someone reenacting a private fantasy of control. Once inside, he turns the room into an extension of his mind. Every surface becomes potential leverage. Every blind angle becomes a weapon. Every second he remains unseen becomes proof that he is still ahead of the people who think they are tracking him. Nick's return is marked by the kind of subtle dread that often appears only after a person is already in danger. A stillness that feels wrong, a silence that seems slightly too careful, a shift in the atmosphere that has no visible source and yet presses against the back of the neck. Nick is the kind of man who notices these things, but even suspicion can come a heartbeat too late when someone is already inside the perimeter. He steps into the room carrying the burden of too many unfinished conflicts, his mind divided between present threats and the emotional wreckage trailing behind him. That division is enough. It is all Matt needs. The door opens, the room appears normal, and within seconds normality becomes a lie. Matt waits behind the door like a dark thought made flesh, watching Nick enter his own space only to lose control of it instantly. The moment Nick turns his back, the trap closes. The attack is fast, brutal, and efficient, with none of the chaos of uncontrolled rage. That is what makes it so chilling. Matt is not exploding. He is executing. If Nick is overpowered, drugged, and moved elsewhere, the psychological violence matters as much as the physical. To wake up disoriented, stripped of memory, trapped in a place chosen by an enemy, is not just terrifying, it is humiliating. Nick is a man who has built his life around action, reaction, protection, movement. To be rendered unconscious and repositioned like an object by someone he despises would wound his pride almost as deeply as it threatens his freedom. But humiliation is exactly what Matt wants. He does not simply want Nick to fear him. He wants Nick to feel helpless within his own identity, uncertain of what happened, uncertain of what was planted, uncertain of what the world will believe when it sees the evidence. Matt knows that when a man like Nick loses control of the narrative, panic begins to do half the work. The more Nick tries to reconstruct events, the more he risks sounding guilty. The more furious he becomes, the more unstable he appears. Matt's real weapon has never been brute force alone. It is contamination. He invades the truth until everyone touched by it begins to look compromised. That is why Adam becomes such an irresistible target in Matt's broader design. Framing Nick alone would be dangerous enough, but drawing Adam into the setup makes the destruction more complete, more intimate, and more poisonous for the Newman family as a whole. Matt understands the emotional architecture of that family all too well. He knows their old fractures never truly disappear. He knows that crisis does not unite them cleanly. It usually reopens resentment, suspicion, old wounds, and the familiar question of who can be trusted when everything collapses. If Adam can be drugged, abducted, or planted at the scene alongside Nick, the result would be far worse than a criminal investigation. It would become a family implosion. Two brothers already carrying years of rivalry, guilt, rivalry disguised as loyalty, and loyalty disguised as anger would suddenly be forced into the same nightmare with the law, the media, and their own relatives closing in around them. Matt does not just want them accused. He wants them contaminated by association, trapped inside a version of reality where even innocence begins to look strategic. There is a vicious intelligence in choosing Adam for this role. Adam is exactly the kind of man whose past can be used against him even when he is telling the truth. He has spent too much of his life being perceived through the lens of old sins, dark instincts, and emotional volatility. Even when he tries to do the right thing, suspicion follows him like a shadow. Matt knows that. He knows Adam's name carries enough baggage to make any accusation feel instantly plausible. Put Adam in the wrong room, next to the wrong body, with the wrong forensic trail pointing in his direction, and half the battle is already won. Adam would not merely have to prove innocence. He would have to fight the far older prejudice that he is somehow always capable of the worst. For a man who has spent years trying to outrun the darkest assumptions about himself, this kind of trap would feel like a nightmare designed specifically for his soul. It would not just threaten prison or scandal. It would threaten the fragile identity he has built through relentless struggle, forcing him to confront the possibility that no matter how much he changes, the world will always be ready to believe he has snapped again. Riza's role in this looming catastrophe makes the story even more volatile because she stands at the intersection of betrayal and expendability. If Matt truly believes she turned against him, then she is no longer a partner, an accomplice, or even a complication. She becomes a liability demanding punishment. That shift is often where the most dangerous men become their most lethal. Once betrayal enters the mind of someone already obsessed with control, mercy becomes almost impossible. Matt may not see Riza as a human being in crisis. He may see her as a stain on his authority, a witness to his weakness, proof that even those near him can choose survival over submission. In that state of mind, killing her would not only feel justified to him, it would feel necessary. And if her death can be transformed into a weapon against Nick and Adam, so much the better. Her body would become more than the end of a life. It would become a stage prop in a larger act of revenge, a permanent accusation arranged to bury two brothers under suspicion and horror. What makes Riza's danger especially tragic is that she may realize too late that Matt's rage has moved beyond argument. People caught in toxic alliances often believe they still have time to explain, bargain, or reposition themselves. They mistake a dangerous man's silence for hesitation when it is often calculation. Riza may sense the shift in Matt's demeanor, may notice the way his calm has become colder, the way his eyes no longer search for understanding but for opportunity. Yet by the time she recognizes that she has stopped being useful and started being disposable, escape may already be narrowing around her. If Matt has decided that her death serves both vengeance and strategy, then every private meeting, every hidden room, every car ride, every drink, every apology becomes a possible prelude to disaster. She is not just in danger because Matt is angry. She is in danger because Matt has found a way to make her suffering productive for his larger scheme. Back in Genoa City's inner circles, the emotional consequences of Matt's plan would ripple outward with savage force. If Nick disappears or reappears in disoriented fragments, if Adam is suddenly missing hours of memory, if a body is discovered and the evidence points toward them, the Newman family would not respond with calm unity. They would fracture under pressure exactly as Matt intends. Victor would rage not only at the external threat, but at the unbearable fact that someone dared touch his sons in a way designed to humiliate the family publicly. His fury would not be simple paternal concern. It would also be pride, insult, and the cold instinct of a patriarch who cannot tolerate being made to look vulnerable. Nikki would be torn between fear for her children and the exhaustion of watching trauma continue to stalk the family generation after generation, as though peace is something the Newmans are simply not allowed to keep. Victoria would likely approach the crisis with defensive steel, pushing for control, refusing to let emotion cloud the response. Yet underneath that discipline would be the old terror of losing a brother to forces more irrational than business warfare, more personal than public scandal. And Sharon, If pulled into Nick's orbit again through fear and concern, would feel the familiar ache of loving a man whose life never stays safe for long enough to heal. Nick himself would be pushed into one of the most psychologically punishing corners of his life. Even if he survives the initial abduction, even if he finds a way to think clearly through the drug haze and panic, he would still have to confront the possibility that every piece of evidence around him has been positioned to erase the truth before he can speak it. Nick is strong, but he is not immune to the corrosive effect of injustice repeated too many times. There is a specific kind of rage that emerges when a man realizes he is being forced not only to fight an enemy, but to defend reality itself. If Matt succeeds in making Nick appear guilty of Riza's death or of some wider crime scene, Nick's anger would not remain controlled for long. It would deepen into obsession. He would need to expose Matt not just to stay free, but to reclaim his own name from a lie designed to swallow it. That need could make Nick reckless. The more cornered he feels, the more likely he becomes to take risks, ignore advice, push allies away, and pursue Matt with the kind of tunnel vision that destroys judgment. A framed man does not think like a safe man. He thinks like someone running out of time while the walls tighten in every direction. Adam's reaction would be even more combustible, because the trap would cut into wounds he has spent years trying to bury. If Adam wakes beside evidence, blood, or a corpse with no memory of how he got there, the terror would immediately tangle with self-doubt. That is Matt's genius. Adam has lived so long under the weight of his own dark history that even innocence can feel unstable to him. For one horrifying second, maybe more, he might question himself. Not because he is guilty, but because trauma distorts certainty. If he was drugged, if his senses are broken, if the scene is arranged with grotesque precision, Adam might experience the deepest violation of all, the fear that his mind has become a weapon against him. Once that terror passes, rage would take over. Real, consuming, volcanic rage. The kind that makes him dangerous not because he loses intelligence, but because intelligence becomes fully harnessed to vengeance. Adam would not settle for mere survival. He would want Matt dismantled completely. Yet that very intensity would make him appear even more suspicious to outsiders, completing the cruel cycle Matt intended from the start. The relationship between Nick and Adam in the middle of this nightmare would become one of the most compelling fault lines in the story. Under ordinary pressure, old resentments between them can easily surface. Years of competition, moral disagreement, different relationships with Victor, and different ways of carrying pain have left too much scar tissue for easy brotherhood. But being framed together would force a brutal choice. Cling to old mistrust and let Matt divide them exactly as intended, or trust each other in the most impossible circumstances imaginable. That trust would not come easily. Nick might question Adam's judgment. Adam might resent Nick's instinct to take charge. Each might fear that the other is hiding something, misremembering something, or about to make a disastrous move born of pride. Yet the trap's cruelty may also become the one thing strong enough to strip their rivalry down to its rawest truth. Beneath all the conflict, both know what it means to be Newman men caught inside a game designed by someone who feeds on weakness. If they are to survive, they may have to become what they rarely manage to be for long. Brothers first, adversaries second. Matt's motivations, meanwhile, would continue to darken with every step of the plan. This is no longer about escaping consequences or striking a single blow against one enemy. It is about domination through narrative. Matt wants to decide who appears monstrous, who appears unstable, who appears guilty, and who gets to scream the truth from inside a cage no one wants to open. There is a narcissistic thrill in that kind of manipulation. It allows him to play God with other people's identities. Nick becomes the man who cannot explain how the evidence followed him. Adam becomes the man everyone was always prepared to suspect. Riza becomes the dead woman whose silence Matt can shape into accusation. Even law enforcement becomes part of the machinery, not through corruption necessarily, but through predictability. Matt relies on process. He relies on the cold logic of evidence collection, the emotional impact of a body, the appearance of motive, the pressure of public perception. He knows that once the first official report is written, innocence begins from a position of weakness. And yet, every great trap carries within it the seed of its own instability. The more elaborate Matt's scheme becomes, the more variables it introduces. A delayed arrival, a partial memory, an overlooked camera, A toxicology detail that fails to align with the official timeline. A witness who notices the wrong car at the wrong hour. A single inconsistency in the staging that only someone deeply familiar with Nick or Adam would catch. This is where the tension around the broader Y&R world can become even more gripping. Perhaps Sharon senses something in Nick's behavior before his disappearance that does not align with guilt. Perhaps Chelsea, knowing Adam's fragility and patterns better than most, recognizes that something about the accusations feels too perfectly tailored to his darkest history. Perhaps Victor's fury sharpens into strategic clarity, leading him not merely to defend his sons publicly but to hunt for the flaw in the setup privately. The Newmans are many things, but when cornered, they are relentless. Matt may believe he is arranging a masterstroke, but he is also provoking a family that responds to humiliation with war. Still, the emotional cost of that war would be immense. If Riza dies, her death cannot remain just a plot device in the eyes of those drawn into the aftermath. Someone will have to carry the human grief of it. Someone will have to confront the fact that beneath the manipulation and forensic games lies a murdered woman whose fear, betrayal, and final moments were consumed by a man's need for revenge. That knowledge would linger heavily over Nick and Adam, especially if they were physically trapped with her body as part of Matt's setup. There is a horror in proximity to death that does not vanish once innocence is proven. The smell of the room, the stillness of the body, the claustrophobic realization that someone wanted them to wake beside irreversible tragedy as though they belonged there forever. That experience would stain them both. Nick might bury the trauma beneath action, refusing to admit how deeply it shook him. Adam might internalize it more dangerously, allowing the violation to feed old darkness he has spent years struggling not to become. The law, too, would become a pressure cooker. Investigators might initially believe what they see, especially if Matt arranges the evidence with enough malice and precision. Nick's known conflicts, Adam's history, the apparent opportunity, the forensic trail, the lack of clear memory due to drugging, all of it could line up in the most devastating way. The brothers would not only be fighting Matt, they would be fighting time, procedure, reputation, and the terrifying possibility that once suspicion hardens into official belief, truth alone may not be enough to free them quickly. That is where desperation breeds dangerous decisions. Nick might consider fleeing to buy time, which would only deepen suspicion. Adam might be tempted to pursue Matt outside the law, convinced that legal channels are already poisoned. Victor might deploy power in ways that provoke even more backlash. Every choice would carry risk, and every risk would move the brothers closer to the very image Matt wants burned into public view. Newman men as violent, unstable, guilty. The most painful dimension of the story is that it forces each major character into a moral threshold. Nick must decide whether his need to retaliate against Matt is stronger than his need to stay disciplined long enough to survive the trap. Adam must decide whether being once again painted as the family monster will break him or refine him into something colder and more focused than ever before. Riza, if she has any chance to act before Matt closes in completely, must decide whether to keep running from the truth she helped create or finally expose everything and risk dying for it. Victor must decide whether protecting his sons means trusting them, controlling them, or launching a private war that may scorch everyone nearby. Even Sharon, Chelsea, and others orbiting the crisis would have to decide how much faith they can place in men whose lives are constantly shadowed by violence and accusation. The trap Matt builds is not only physical, it is moral. It forces everyone to reveal what they become when truth is buried under fear. If the story reaches its darkest turn, with Nick and Adam trapped together in a sealed space beside Riza's body, the scene would be pure emotional combustion. Nick's first instinct would be survival and escape, but beneath that would be revulsion at what Matt has engineered. Adam's first instinct might be fury sharpened by humiliation, the unbearable insult of once again being placed exactly where the world expects him to belong. The presence of Riza's body would deny both men the luxury of focusing only on themselves. Her death would fill the room with accusation even before the police arrive. Every second spent there would raise the stakes. Every attempt to get free would risk disturbing evidence. Every minute would feed the timeline Matt wants authorities to see. Inside that claustrophobic nightmare, old resentments between the brothers might erupt, but so might something stronger. Faced with a setup this monstrous, They may finally understand that surviving will require more than mutual tolerance. It will require total alignment, trust forged not from affection but from necessity. And when the truth begins to surface, when the first cracks appear in Matt's carefully staged reality, the fallout would be explosive. Exposure would not calm the emotional storm. It would deepen it. Nick would want justice with a ferocity bordering on obsession, not merely because he was framed, but because Matt dared to invade his life so intimately, turn his space into a trap, and weaponize his name. Adam would likely want something even darker, not just exposure, but total psychological destruction for the man who tried to reduce him to an old stereotype and bury him there forever. Victor would unleash the full force of his wrath, not only as a father, but as a man who never forgives attacks on blood. And if Riza's death becomes the undeniable centerpiece of Matt's downfall, then the victory will still taste bitter. Because clearing Nick and Adam will not bring her back. Exposing Matt will not erase the terror, the humiliation, the fractured trust, or the nightmares waiting after the immediate danger passes. That is what makes this storyline so powerful in emotional terms. It is not simply a thriller about a setup. It is a story about identity under assault. Nick is forced to face what happens when his instincts fail at the exact moment his enemy has planned for. Adam is forced to confront how easily his past can still be used as a prison even when he is innocent. Riza becomes the tragic measure of what betrayal costs when a dangerous man decides someone's life is worth less than his revenge. Matt becomes the embodiment of a terrifying idea that has haunted Genoa City before. That the most dangerous enemy is not always the one with the loudest rage, but the one patient enough to make guilt look inevitable. In a world of old grudges, fragile reputations, and family wounds that never quite close, that kind of enemy is almost impossible to fight without losing part of yourself in the process. And perhaps that is the darkest truth of all. Even if Nick and Adam survive, even if Matt is exposed, even if the legal trap collapses under the weight of one missed detail or one witness he failed to silence, none of them will leave untouched. Nick will carry the memory of opening his own door and stepping into a trap designed to erase him. Adam will carry the horror of waking inside a nightmare the world was always ready to believe about him. The Newman family will carry the renewed knowledge that enemies no longer need brute force to destroy them. They only need patience, precision, and a body in the right room. And Matt, in choosing this path, will have declared something chilling about the war he is waging. He is no longer satisfied with revenge that wounds. He wants revenge that rewrites reality, that makes innocence look guilty, that turns brothers against themselves, and that leaves everyone asking whether the truth can still matter after enough blood has been arranged around a lie.